Flavius, Flavius Josephus against Apion, or Antiquity of the Jews, Book 1, Paragraph 1. I suppose that my books of the Antiquities of the Jews, most excellent Epaphroditus, I have made it evident to those who pursue them that our Jewish nation is of very great antiquity, and had a distinct subsistence of its own originally. As also I have therein declared how we came to inhabit this country wherein we now live. Those antiquities contain the history of 5,000 years and are taken out of our sacred books, but are translated by me into the Greek tongue. However, since I observe a considerable number of people giving ear to the reproaches that are laid against us by those who bear ill will to us, and will not believe what I have written concerning the antiquity of our nation, while they take it for plain sign that our nation is of late date, because they are not so much as vouchsafed a bare mention by the most famous historiographers among the Grecians. I therefore have thought myself under an obligation to write somewhat briefly about these subjects, in order to convict those that reproach us of spite and voluntary falsehood, and to correct the ignorance of others, and to instruct all those who are desirous of knowing the truth of what great antiquity we really are. As for the witnesses whom I shall produce for the proof of what I say, they shall be such as are esteemed to be of the greatest reputation for truth, and the most skilful in the knowledge of all antiquity, by the Greeks themselves. I will also show that those who have written so reproachfully and falsely about us are to be convicted by what they have written themselves to the contrary. I shall also endeavor to give an account of the reasons why it had so happened that there had not been a great number of Greeks who have made a mention of our nation in their histories. I will, however, bring those Grecians to light who have not omitted such our history, for the sake of those that either do not know them or pretend not to know them already. And now, paragraph 2. And now, in the first place, I cannot but greatly wonder at those men who suppose that we must attend to none but Grecians when we are inquiring about the most ancient facts, and must inform ourselves of their truth from them only, while we must not believe ourselves nor other men. For I am convinced that the very reverse is the truth of the case. I mean this: if we will not be led by vain opinions, but will make inquiry after truth from facts themselves, for they will find that almost all which concerns the Greeks happened not long ago. Nay, one may say, is of yesterday only. I speak of the building of their cities, the invention of their arts, and the description of their laws, and so their care about the writing down of their histories. It is very near the last thing that they set about. However, they acknowledge themselves so far that they were the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, and the Phoenicians, for I will not now reckon ourselves among them, that have preserved the memorials of the most ancient and most lasting traditions of mankind. For almost all these nations inhabit such countries as are least subject to destruction from the world about them, and these also have taken special care to have nothing omitted of what was remarkably done among them, but their history was esteemed sacred and put into public tables as written by men of the greatest wisdom they had among them. But as for the place where the Grecians inhabit, 10,000 destructions have overtaken it and blotted out the memory of former actions, so that they were ever beginning a new way of living, and supposed that every one of them was the origin of their new state. It was also late, and with difficulty, that they came to know the letters they now use. For those who would advance their use of these letters to the greatest antiquity pretend that they learned them from the Phoenicians and from Cadmus. Yet is nobody able to demonstrate that they have any writing preserved from that time, neither in their temples nor in any other public monuments. This appears because the time when those lived went to the Trojan War so many years afterward is in great doubt, and great inquiry is made whether the Greeks used their letters at the time. And the most prevailing opinion, and that nearest the truth, is that their present way of using those letters was unknown at that time. However, there is not any writing which the Greeks agreed to be genuine, among them ancienter than Homer's poems, who most plainly be confessed later than the siege of Troy. Nay, the report goes that even he did not leave his poems in writing, but that their memory was preserved in songs, and they were put together afterward. And this is the reason of such a number of variations as are found in them. As for those who set themselves about writing their histories, I mean such as Cadmus of Miletus and Acusailus of Argos, and any others that may be mentioned as succeeding Acusilaeus, they lived but a little while before the Persian expedition into Greece. But then for those that first introduced philosophy and the consideration of things celestial and divine among them, such as Pherecydes the Syrian and Pythagoras and Thales, all with one consent agree that they learned what they knew of the Egyptians and Chaldeans and wrote but little. And these are the things which are supposed to be the oldest of all among the Greeks, and they have much ado to believe that the writings ascribed to those men are genuine. How can it then be other than an absurd thing for the Greeks to be so proud and to vaunt themselves to be the only people that are acquainted with antiquity and that have delivered the true accounts of those early times after an accurate manner? Nay, who is there that cannot easily gather from the Greek writers themselves that they knew but little on any good foundation when they set to write, but rather wrote their histories from their own conjectures? Accordingly, they confute one another in their own books to purpose, and are not ashamed to give us the most contradictory accounts of the same thing, and I should spend my time to little purpose if I should pretend to teach the Greeks that which they know better than I already. What a great disagreement there is between Helicus and Acusailus about their genealogies. In how many cases Acusailus corrects Hesiod, or after what manner Hephorus demonstrates Helenicius to have told lies in the greatest part of his history, as does Timaeus in like manner as do Ephorus and the succeeding writers do to Timaeus, and all the later writers do to Herodotus. Nor could Timaeus agree with Antiochus and Philistius or with Callias about the Sicilian history no more than do the several writers of the Attidae follow one another about the Athenian affairs. Nor do the historians the like that wrote the Argolic about the affairs of the Argevies. And now what need I say any more about particular cities and smaller places, while in the most approved writers of the expedition of the Persians and of the actions which were therein performed there are so great differences? Nay, Thucydides himself is accused by some as writing what is false, although he seems to have given us the exact history of the affairs of his own time. Paragraph 4. As for the occasions of this so great disagreement of theirs, There may be assigned many that are very probable, if any have a mind to make an inquiry about them. But I ascribe these contradictions chiefly to two causes, which I will now mention, and still think what I shall mention in the first place to be the principal of all. For if we remember that in the beginning the Greeks had taken no care to have public records of their several transactions preserved, this must for certain have afforded those that would afterward write about those ancient transactions the opportunity of making mistakes, and power of making lies also, for this original recording of such ancient transactions had not only been neglected by the other states of Greece, but even among the Athenians themselves also, who pretend to be aborigines and to have applied themselves to learning, there are no such records extant. Nay, they say themselves that the laws of Draco concerning murders which are now extant in writing are the most ancient of the public records, which Draco yet lived but a little time before the tyrant Pisistratus. For as to the Arcadians who make such boasts of their antiquity, what need I speak of them in particular, since it was still later before they got their letters and learned them, and that with difficulty also. Paragraph 5. There must therefore naturally arise great difference among writers when they had no original records to lay for their foundation, which might at once inform those who had an inclination to learn and contradict those that would tell lies. However, we are to suppose a second occasion besides the former of these. Contradictions. It is this, that those who were the most zealous to write history were not solicitous for the discovery of truth, although it was very easy for them always to make such a profession, but their business was to demonstrate that they could write well, and make an impression upon mankind thereby, and in what manner of writing they thought they were able to exceed others, to that did they apply themselves. Some of them betook themselves to the writing of fabulous narrations, some of them endeavored to please the cities or the kings by writing in their commendation, others of them fell to finding fault with transactions or with the writers of such transactions, and thought to make a great figure by so doing. And indeed, these do what is of all things the most contrary to true history, for it is the great character of true history that all concerned therein both speak and write the same things, while these men, by writing differently about the same things, think they shall be believed to write with the greatest regard to the truth. We therefore, who are Jews, must yield to the Grecian writers as to language and eloquence of composition, but then we shall give them no much preference as to the verity of ancient history, and least of all as to that part which concerns the affairs of our own several countries. Paragraph 6. As to the care of writing down the records from their earliest antiquity among the Egyptians and Babylonians, that the priests were entrusted therewith, and employed a philosophical concern about it, that these were the Chaldean priests that did so among the Babylonians, and that the Phoenicians who were mingled among the Greeks did especially make use of their letters, both for the common affairs of life and for the delivering down of the history of common transactions. I think I may omit any proof, because all men allow it to be so to be. But now as to our forefathers, that they took no less care about writing such records, for I will not say they took greater care than the others I spoke of, and that they committed that matter to their high priests and to the prophets, and that these records have been written all along down to our own times with the utmost accuracy. Nay, if it be not too bold for me to say it, our history will be so written hereafter. I shall endeavor briefly to inform you. Paragraph 7. For our forefathers did not only appoint the best of these priests, those that attended upon the divine worship, for that design from the beginning, but made provision that the stock of the priest should continue unmixed and pure. For he who is partaker of the priesthood must propagate of a wife of the same nation, without having any regard to money or any other dignities. But he is to make a scrutiny, and take his wife's genealogy from the ancient tables, and procure many witnesses to it. And this is our practice not only in Judea, but wheresoever any body of men of our nation do live. And even there an exact catalogue of our priests' marriages is kept. I mean at Egypt and at Babylon, or in any other place of the rest of the habitable earth, whithersoever our priests are scattered. For they sent to Jerusalem the ancient names of their parents in writing, as well as those of their remoter ancestors, and signify who are the witnesses also. But if any war falls out, such as have fallen out, a great many of them already, when Antiochus Epiphanes made an invasion upon our country, as also when Pompey the Great and Quintilius Varus did so also, and principally in the wars that have happened in our own times, those priests that survived them composed new tables of genealogy out of the old records, and examined the circumstances of the women that remain. For still they do not admit of those that have been captives, suspecting that they had conversation with some foreigners. But what is um, But what is the strongest argument of our exact management in this matter is what I am now going to say, that we have the names of our high priests from father to son set down in our records for the interval of 2000 years. And if any one of these have been transgressors of these rules, they are prohibited to present themselves at the altar or to be partakers of any other of our purifications. And this is justly or rather necessarily done, because everyone is not permitted of his own accord to be a writer, nor is there any disagreement in what is written, they being only prophets that have written the original and earliest accounts of things as they learned from them of God himself by inspiration, and others have written what had happened in their own times, and that in a very distinct manner also. Paragraph 8. For we have not an innumerable multitude of books among us, disagreeing from and contradicting one another as the Greeks have, but only 22 books, which contain the records of all the past times, which are justly believed to be divine. And of them 5 belong to Moses, which contain his laws and the traditions of the origin of mankind till his death. This interval of time was little short of 3000 years. But as to the time from the death of Moses till the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, who reigned after Xerxes, the prophets who were after Moses wrote down what was done in their times in 13 books. The remaining 4 books contain hymns to God and precepts for the conduct of human life. It is true our history had been written since Artaxerxes very particularly, but had not been esteemed of the like authority with the former by our forefathers, because there had not been an exact succession of prophets since that time. And how firmly we have given credit to those books of our own nation is evident by what we do. For during so many ages as have already passed, no one has been so bold as either to add anything to them, to take anything from them, or to make any change in them. But it becomes natural to all Jews immediately and from their very birth to esteem those books to contain divine doctrines and to persist in them, and if occasion be, will willingly to die for them. For it is not, for it is no new thing for our captives, many of them in number, and frequently in time, to be seen to endure racks and deaths of all kinds upon the theatres, that they may not be obliged to say one word against our laws and the records that contain them. Whereas there are none at all among the Greeks who would undergo the least harm on that account. Nor in case all the writings that are among them were to be destroyed, for they take them to be such discourses as are famed agreeably to the inclinations of those that write them, and they have justly the same opinion of the ancient writers, since they see some of the present generation bold enough to write about such affairs, wherein they were not present, nor had concern enough to inform themselves about them from those that knew them, examples of which may be had in this late war of ours, where some persons have written histories and published them without having been in the places concerned or having been near them when the actions were done. But these men put a few things together by hearsay, and insolently abuse the world, and call these writings by the name of histories. Paragraph 9. As for myself, I have composed the true history of that whole old war, and all the particulars that occurred therein, as having been concerned in all its transactions, for I acted as general of those among us that are named Galileans, as long as it was possible for us to make any opposition. I was then seized on by the Romans and became a captive. Vespasian also and Titus had me kept under guard and forced me to attend them continually. At the first I was put into bonds, but was set at liberty afterward, and sent to accompany Titus when he came from Alexandria to the siege of Jerusalem, during which time there was nothing done which escaped my knowledge. For what happened in the Roman camp I saw, and wrote down carefully, and what information the deserters brought out of the city. I was the only man that understood them. Afterward I got leisure at Rome, and when all my materials were prepared for that work, I made use of some persons to assist me in learning the Greek tongue, and by this means I composed the history of those transactions. And I was so well assured of the truth of what I related that I first of all appealed to those that had the supreme command in that war, Vespasian and Titus, as witnesses for me. For to them I presented those books first of all, and after them to many of the Romans who had been in the war. I also sold them to many of our own men who understood the Greek philosophy. Among them were Julius Archelaus, Herod, king of Chalcis, a person of great gravity, and King Agrippa himself, a person that deserved the greatest admiration. Now all these men bore their testimony to me that I had the strictest regard to truth, who yet would not have dissembled the matter, nor been silent if I, out of ignorance or out of favor to any side, either given false colors to actions or omitted any of them. Paragraph 10. There have been indeed some bad men who have attempted to calumniate, calumniate my history and took it to be a kind of scholastic performance for the exercise of young men. A strange sort of accusation and calumny this, since every one that undertakes to deliver the history of actions truly ought to know them accurately, himself in the first place, as either having been concerned in them himself or been informed of them by such as knew them. Now both these methods of knowledge I may very properly pretend to in the composition of both my works, for as I said I have translated Antiquities out of our sacred books, which I easily could do since I was a priest by my birth and have studied that philosophy which is contained in those writings. And as for the history of the war, I wrote it as having been an actor myself in many of its transactions, an eyewitness in the greatest part of the rest, and as not unacquainted with anything whatsoever that was either said or done in it. How imprudent then must those deserve to be esteemed who undertake to contradict me about the true who undertake to contradict me about the true state of those affairs, who, although they pretend to have made use of both the emperor's own memories, yet they could not be acquainted with our affairs who fought against them.